As the White House tries to enact its domestic agenda, it's now under mounting pressure to do more to stop the worst fighting in Israel since 2014. The outbreak of violence has now entered its second week. Israel continues to hammer targets in Gaza as Hamas rains down rockets on the southern part of Israel. Over 200 Palestinians, about a dozen Israelis have been killed in all this. Today, Biden spoke with Netanyahu of Israel. The White House says Biden expressed support for a ceasefire, stopping short of a full-on demand.
The president's view and the view of senior leaders in the White House is that our role as the White House, as the federal government, as the president of the United States, is to play a constructive role in diplomacy, to use our role, our relationships around the world, to have intensive, quiet discussions with leaders in the region.
Any of my colleagues that even have sort of empathy towards Palestinians, they do it quietly with whispering because they continue to be intimidated and bullied by those that want to continue the status quo of apartheid in Israel.
President Biden's support for a ceasefire in the Middle East falls short of a request from 28 senators in his own party. That's over half the Democrats in the caucus. They're demanding an immediate truce. It's a lot to talk about with our guest. David Plouffe is back with us, former Obama campaign manager, senior advisor to the president, also on the board of directors of the Obama Foundation, and Michael Steele, former chairman of the Republican National Committee, former lieutenant governor of the great state of Maryland, host of the great podcast, The Michael Steele Podcast. Gentlemen, good evening and welcome to you both. David, perhaps you heard my conversation with my friend of many years, Martin Fletcher, with whom I have covered so many stories over there. I am fascinated by the migration in our domestic politics on this story regarding this nation formed in the ashes and with the diaspora from the Holocaust, with such determination and high hopes right there in a dangerous neighborhood in the middle of the desert. This is sizable, this many Democrats in the Senate. Schumer, though he is not part of the graphic we have to depict that many Democrats in the Senate, is with them on the topic of a ceasefire. And while, of course, our nation is getting over the loss of Jared from the process, we do have leverage in this conversation as a country.
Well, no question, Brian. So you captured theirs with those senators. The politics of this has been changing in the Democratic Party, but you probably remember 2012, Brian. So let's think about the general election. Barack Obama was president, running for re-election, was seeking a peace deal, was a staunch ally of Israel, facilitated, the Iron Dome missile defense system going to Israel. But the Prime Minister Netanyahu was actually actively supporting our opponent, Governor Romney. There was probably 1,000 stories written about how Barack Obama was going to lose the Jewish vote, and now it cost us Florida. We got 70% of the Jewish vote, won the state of Florida. But what you see in the base of the Democratic Party, a lot of those Democratic senators are of a certain vintage, but certainly younger Democratic activists. And I think this is happening all around the world. You see the reactions all around the world. If you believe in the right of Israel to exist, which, of course, I do, and I think most Americans do, but you also want a two-state solution. Israel, I think, is losing, moral authority and support here in this country with younger, not just Democrats, but younger people all around the country. So I think the politics of this have changed a lot over the last couple of decades. But I also believe the belief about the politics, from my experience, was one of the things that was most off in my time in national politics, the way it was covered versus the reality of this issue as it related to national politics.
You are absolutely right that your former boss was painted a certain way on this issue that differed from reality in many ways. So, Michael, you've done nothing to deserve this, but I'm going to play for you the comments from Mitch McConnell. We'll discuss on the other side.
We're already seeing some push the false narrative that this conflict is a tragic dispute between two legitimate combatants, where both sides share blame that is roughly equal. What nonsense.
Michael, however unfair it is to ask you, do you think there's anything close to uniform Republican agreement on the point he just made?
I think in a big sense, yes. I think in if you're looking at it, Israel versus Hamas, McConnell is exactly right. This is not equal combatants here. You know, one is a terrorist organization, and the other is not. And I think so. The idea that there's a level of equality there, I think a lot of Republicans would not buy that idea and reject, as McConnell did it with the opening remark there about, you know, this notion that there's somehow something, you know, on par with, you know, between Israel and Hamas, that the U.S. government and our allies should, you know, treat Hamas the way they would treat Israel or any other nation state. So I think that there is unanimity in that regard. It's also interesting how, you know, the Trump foreign policy relative to Israel has been a part of the narrative, but has not been raised in the context of this conflict. You made the allusion to Mr. Jarrett and his global trotting in this space. And I find it interesting that Republicans have not fallen back on that necessarily, you know, to push up against the Biden administration. And I think that's because they recognize that is a very tenuous position to be in, given where things are now, particularly relative to where they were. So, you know, the reality for McConnell is to sort of, you know, push back on Hamas, stand firm with Israel, and see what Biden does to navigate with Democrats, to your earlier discussion, to move the ball towards some level of ceasefire.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.